and welcome back to another one of these groundbreaking sessions. Today we have got one of his kind. We have got a very special session for you guys today. We are going to be talking about auctions, and we have got a very special guest who is an auctioneer for Ray White Commercial at the moment. And today we're going to be going behind the hammer, what every buyer should know from an auctioneer's perspective. And I reckon probably every seller should know as well. So I'm going to welcome on board Daniel. And Daniel, I'm not even going to bother trying to say your surname. I think I'm just going to call you Daniel Diamond. But you can introduce yourself with your full surname. I'll leave that
No
up to
stress. I
you.
always struggle to spell it myself, so it's a tough one. But it's actually easy to say. It's Diamantopoulos. But yes, Diamond for short is my stage name here at the office.
There we go. So, Daniel, tell us a little bit about yourself in 30 seconds. You used to be a real estate agent and you went into auctioneering. Tell us a little bit about the journey there.
Yeah, so I started my real estate journey when I was very young, when I was 18 years old. I'm 38 now, so 20 years have gone by. I've literally invested more than a half my life into my career. Started from ground up, sort of listing and selling, and auctioning has been a big part of my world for probably more than 10 years. But not to this scale, this volume. I'm obviously doing a lot more volume now, just me being a focused auctioneer. But it's been a crazy ride. Lots of stories, no doubt. But now trying something different. I think auctions for me is what I love doing. I love the crowd. I love entertaining and a little bit jovial. So, but it's definitely something that I absolutely love and adore.
I was just about to ask you, what do you love about auctioneering? And you've just said it yourself. You love the crowds and you love entertainment. So you love the drama of being up there and hitting that hammer.
Oh, look at the energy that comes with a packed front yard or a buzzing in-room event is just unmatched. We love the momentum, the anticipation that builds. And, if you've got a huge demand, it's part theatre, part competition. And I
Yeah.
love when people feed off it.
That's awesome. That is just amazing. We're going to be talking about all of that drama and excitement for both the seller as well as the buyer, bearing in mind that I think most of our listeners are buyers. And I'm going to say a lot of the people that I speak to probably shy away from wanting to go to an auction. I think they feel intimidated by auctions. And I'm choosing my words there carefully. I'm not saying that they're feeling intimidated by the auctioneers. Because you're a very nice guy, and I know you. I mean,
Thank
I
you.
think you're a very nice guy.
Oh, thank you.
So I think it
Appreciate
would.
it. I'm not scary. I don't think I can come across as a scary auctioneer. Apart from the beard, though, I mean that might raise some eyebrows. But no, I'm definitely not scary, and they should feel very comfortable.
So Daniel, when you're up there and you're doing the auction, you're actually looking at the audience, you're checking them out, they're checking you out. What are you looking for?
I guess preparation. You can sort of see who has prepared for the day and who hasn't. I think for me, it's more, how can I spot the buyers from a mile away? Most of them, they come up to me, they generally ask insightful questions. I encourage them to not get easily rattled by minor hiccups on auction day because I guess it should be, what can feel nerve-wracking. I try to put a nice, calm, confident tone that sort of settles their nerves. Because at the end of the day, I'm sure they just want to get their weekends back and end those searches and and be done.
Mm,
So we try to make it as comfortable as we can. And I think until you've kind of bought and sold yourself, you can kind of really, relate.
yeah.
So what I am looking for is how people are and how they definitely are prepared for the day.
Okay, so what we're going to be talking about in this podcast is definitely lifting that lid off and making the auctioneer a very human, I want to say, approachable type character. So you hit the nail on the head there. You said you like it when people come and speak to you and what would they be asking you questions about the property?
Yeah, typically, I guess, most of the questions are And what we encourage people to ask is, like I always have a saying in my world: you never get in trouble asking questions. You may get in trouble for asking for saying statements, but never getting in trouble for asking questions. So we want to
Absolutely.
make sure that all bidders, have before they raise their hand, have the right, information, or they've done their due diligence before, the big day. And we don't say do it on the day. We want to, plan before the day, and sometimes it could be days, it could be weeks in advance.
So your best type of audience would be an educated audience, let's say, an audience that have done their homework, an audience that have done their due diligence, that know a lot about the property. I mean, they don't really have an opportunity to ask you questions while you're up there hitting the hammer and auctioneering. But from your perspective, do you prefer to have an educated audience and you prefer to have a full house or just a couple of serious bidders? What would be better from your perspective?
Look, I mean, give me four, serious, emotionally invested bidders over a crowd of, 20 browsers or tire kickers every single time, right?
Okay.
I think intent matters more than atmosphere. I guess I'm looking for people, not passengers. I guess serious bidders, the ones who've done their homework, spoken to their broker, walked through the property a few times. They're the ones who push the auction forward typically. They're the ones not afraid to open up the bidding or take bold leaps when it matters. I guess that the crowd claps when it sells, but it's those few buyers that come committed can make or break the result. If they're emotionally connected, I guess financially ready and hungry to win, and that's when you see results. And I'll take that over a noisy crowd of spectators any day.
That makes sense. So you really are looking for those bidders who, and I guess where we're going with this, the bidders that have done their homework. And the message to take out there is, guys, if you're thinking about going to an auction, ask the questions, do your due diligence way before, and have that conversation with auctioneers like Daniel before he gets up onto the podium. So you know what you need to be looking out for. And you going into it knowing where your cutoff point is. So there's all of that as the buyer standing in the audience that I think is important. What kind of information do you think would be vital for bidders to have before they raise their hands?
I think at a minimum, I think they should have read through the contract of sale, so know exactly what they're buying. I mean, it seems basic, but you'd be surprised how many people skip this important step and they just go in blind. So, asking the agent beforehand to receive a copy of the contract, understand deposit and settlement terms. So, ask the questions with your agent if they require a 5% deposit or a 10% deposit, and settlement terms, whether it be 30, 60, 90, or and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
So, make sure that that fits, their timeline. I would, check for easements, tenancies, or anything that could affect the title. So having possibly a conveyancer or a solicitor review all of that for you prior, because you'd be surprised how many things could happen, or how many, little niggly problems could occur that you didn't know, sort of post auction. Very important. Have a building and pest inspection done. Make sure you have that reviewed by someone independent before the auction date. So avoid the surprises of any last minute issues that may arise. And don't let emotions override due diligence. I see this way too often, right? People walk in thinking it's like buying a couch or a new pair of shoes. It's not. This is legal. It's a legally binding contract,
Hmm.
and you make sure you want to be bulletproof before you raise your hand, and that will give you the confidence to go and bid to where you feel comfortable, or wherever your bank or budget has allowed for.
Have you ever had the instance where you've had bidders that have come in that haven't really done their homework and they've bidded and it's an emotional thing and they get into it and they sign that contract? And do you have any like stories? Entertain us.
Oh yeah, look, I mean, we get, it's the odd occasion. Like I spend a lot of my time in training agents to make sure that they're educating their buyers, because the last thing we want as a service industry is to have some ill feelings, when it comes to this sort of stuff, because like there's been an example recently where a buyer's put their hand up and they've bought the property and they thought that they could put subject to finance, albeit that there was some English challenges with their the way they were communicating with us. So they didn't really fully understand the full T's and C's. So they've just gone and bid to where they've seen value, and then they've purchased the property. The hammer fell on them, and they've come in and on the last minute, like, oh no, what are we signing? We need finance. And, these are all common pitfalls for people that just don't prepare. But it does happen.
What happens in that instance? I mean, if they haven't prepared and they're not sure and the hammer falls and they've basically won the auction, but they can't afford to, or can they just get up and walk away? What's their obligation the minute that hammer falls?
They do have an obligation to obviously complete their contract signing. I mean, the auctioneer, so my role is to make sure that, I've set clear terms at the start of the auction.
Yeah.
And things like, if you are bidding, one, you need to be registered. You need to sign an unconditional cash clean contract without any subject to clauses. I'll generally go through the deposit and the settlement terms or the preference of the seller, and then I'll call for the bid. So normally, those basic rules get mentioned before I start the auction. But sometimes people can't hear me or understand me, especially if they've got a language barrier.
Hmm.
And in this particular instance, I don't think they actually understood the full T's and C's. And that's no one's fault. But what we're able to do in that moment is find and track down their broker. So we've managed to get them on the phone. And look, within 20 minutes, we managed to smooth things over. They wanted to obviously feel protected with the finance clause, but the broker said that they're very good for it. And it just, it went fine after that. They paid a small 5% deposit, and off they went. But at the very beginning, there's a few alarm bells because they just weren't sure. So I guess it's probably a good segue for what we're doing here, is just to raise awareness.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that one was a good outcome. So they could afford the property. They did go ahead with it. And in that case, it wouldn't have been a cash transaction. I'm imagining it would have been a settlement, maybe a 2 or 3 week settlement through finance. And that's still acceptable for the seller. They're still happy
Yes.
with that. Good price,
Yep. 100%. Yeah.
happy terms. Okay. Well, that's really good stuff.
Happy days.
Have you had any instances where the hammer's fallen and the buyer can't pay for the property?
Look, and I've called thousands and thousands of auctions,
Yeah.
typically out of Melbourne, where you actually don't need to register as a bidder, ironically.
Oh, wow.
In Queensland, there's obviously some strict laws about registering beforehand, which I much prefer. So that way you can have a discussion with your agent if there's any questions that arise. But in Melbourne, I had one example where we dropped the hammer to the highest bidder. Part of the process, they would have to come inside, do the congratulations, pop the champagnes, and sign a contract and pay a deposit. The buyer got in his car and drove off very fast.
Never to be seen again.
Never to be seen again. So in Victoria, you can sort of roll up and bid without registration, without
Oh,
doing a
wow.
registration process.
Ouch.
So that wasn't fun because we had to then track down the underbidder for them to potentially buy it for $1,000 less, which thankfully they did.
Wow.
But it's a very, very rare occasion that this happens. And again, out of thousands and thousands of auctions, it's probably happened 2 or 3 times. Thankfully, not in Queensland, all in Victoria. So all good.
All in Victoria. Hey, you Victorians, don't go doing that to Daniel, okay? He's a good auctioneer.
No,
Um,
please don't.
Somebody just having a lot of fun and, just testing their margins there, maybe having cold feet at the last minute and thinking, oh, what have I done? Shoop, out of the room they go.
Yes, that's right.
So things happen. So this is a good segue into the buyer's auction toolkit. Let's drill down into 10 questions that every buyer should ask before they step into the auction ring. Just going through what they should be asking and perhaps what they should know before they go into the auction room. So, guys, this is really for you to make notes if you're listening to this. have a good listen, write these notes down, and listen to what Daniel's answers are going to be. First question I'm going to ask you is, or as the auctioneer, or even if you're speaking to the real estate agent, I always find that a classic question is just what is their motivation for selling and why they're selling on auction?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I guess I don't think agents or auctioneers can be, we try to give, some solid advice without kind of breaking the law because, naturally we're bound by privacy in some instances. So I think you can casually ask and you'd be surprised what you can uncover. So,
Mm.
for example, the vendor may have purchased another property. So they're looking for certainty in the sale. So sometimes it's not a matter of price. It could be a matter of process for them to ensure that they just get the home sold or the property sold.
And they'd be looking for speed. So that indicates to the buyer that they're looking for speed over and above price.
Yes, correct. Sometimes it could be a deceased estate where emotions of some sellers can be running high, and that can play a significant role in the negotiation. And there's some, people that sell because they just want to, cash in. So some investment focused sales whereby the numbers are everything to some vendors. So understanding their why helps you time and structure, your preparation to perfection. So asking those questions are important.
Okay, so that's a really, really important question for the buyer to be asking to understand how to position themselves in the whole negotiation of the whole deal. Something else that we often ask as buyers agents, we often ask whether inspections or valuations have been done and whether they would share that with the buyers. Do people ask you that sort of question?
Yeah. So you meaning like building and pest inspections or valuation reports being done? Is that what you're
Yeah.
referring to?
Yeah, so with 50, 100 people coming through as an auction, I'm just chucking a number out there. At the moment, it's more like 100 people that are showing interest. Often people are fairly serious about it and they'll have the inspections done or they'll do the valuations. Would the sellers be open to sharing that with prospective buyers? The auction?
Yeah, I think building and pest inspections get done quite often here in Brisbane, whereas in Victoria, it's part of a buyer's due diligence to be able to do that independently. I always say to always get an independent, for yourself. I mean, if you're investing five, six, upwards of $1 million, and you had
Mm.
to spend five, $600, in your preparation to purchase. I mean, again, it goes back to the theory: you're not buying a couch or a car. In some cases, you do an RACQ test on a car. But this is some serious stuff, and you want to make sure that you're prepared. So, yeah, asking those questions: are there any, building or pest inspection reports that I can view? And probably 90% of the time, if most, agents are taking properties to auction in Queensland, then they will have them prepared. We just got to ask for it.
That's gold.
It really is, and sometimes, look, people are walking around, Mish, with laptops in their back pocket, right? Like that's this phone here, and
Yeah,
realestate.com or Real Commercial has recent sales of everything. So as far as getting, valuations done, as far as monetary valuations done, you can really know very quickly where you should be paying for this property, you know?
absolutely. I mean, and that's all in there doing their due diligence and running, we always say comparative sales and rentals, particularly in commercial. You really want to know whether you're buying above the market or below the market and what you're going to be doing with that property, depending on what your strategy is, really. So, yes, you're 100% right. Those little computers are very valuable that we carry around in our back pockets
Yes,
constantly.
sure.
When it comes to auction terms, now we know that auction terms are usually deposit and pay. How wide are those auction terms? Can we talk a little bit about that? So we all know that it is a deposit that you've got to pay. How long can those auction terms go on for, and what are they?
I guess you can negotiate terms before the auction, and I think it's important you have those questions asked, or you get those questions answered by the actual agent that's running the campaign. Because some vendors will be quite flexible. Some would have a particular date that they need settlement done by because they may need their settlement to align with another purchase that they may have made. So they may not be as negotiable. But I always ask, get in early as you can, reveal yourselves as a buyer or a bidder. There's nothing more important for an agent to help you. Obviously, for you to purchase the property means a lot to the agent. So don't be a ghost. Reach out because you don't want to get caught up during the business, the bidding process,
Mm.
and then something goes awry and you're like, oh, I didn't know that. Well, because you didn't ask.
Right.
So talk to them well ahead of time. If you want a 5% deposit instead of the usual 10%, these are the terms that are generally agreed upon before. Or if you need a 60-day settlement or 90-day settlement as opposed to 30 days and what the vendors are asking for, well, maybe just try to get that in writing. Because most of the time, vendors will be like, yeah, if they're going to bid, 100%, let them, I'll give them another 30 days. That's totally fine.
So what I'm hearing over there is vendors really want you to get into the room and to be bidding, irrespective of whether you need 60 days or 90 days. They just want you in the room and bidding, and they'd be open to whatever those terms are, realistically.
Correct.
I mean,
And that,
from a buyer's perspective, it's I think buyers are generally kind of spooked by auctions because they think the minute you get in the room and that hammer falls, they got to pay the bucks, and that's it. 2 weeks later, zoop, cash is out of your bank account. But what you're saying is not it's not really like that. There is a negotiation point.
Absolutely. And especially if, people are wanting to make offers before the auction, if they want to sort of reveal themselves as the potential buyer or the candidate for this particular property, then it's always important to just stop the guesswork, pick up the phone, ring the agent in charge, negotiate a favorable outcome or, a pre-auction, term that's favorable. We see that the biggest is the 5 and 10%. Not everyone wants to depart with 10%. So that because of cash flow. So 5% usually is fine. As long as it's sufficient, substantial, that you're not going to walk away from, that's when the
Mm,
vendor will be like, hey, that's totally fine.
mm.
But we'd always encourage to definitely do your due diligence and negotiate these terms prior for sure. Because once the hammer falls, we don't want there being any surprises. We would have said, hey, sorry, but we've told you so.
Yeah. So just going back to that, so once the hammer falls, can they get out of that contract?
Look, I mean, in some instances, they can get into some hot water by doing so.
Right. Okay.
For example, if they can't complete their settlement term, they can't, it gets to 30 days and the agents are holding a 5 or a 10% deposit of theirs, and then whatever reason they have a change of mind or change of heart, then they're at risk of losing their deposit that they've paid.
And all their legal fees and whatever due diligence they've put into it and all of that.
Yeah. So assuming it's $1 million and it's a 5% deposit, it's $50,000. It's a lot of money,
Hmm.
plus the legals that are associated with it. Look, thankfully, in all of my time, and I think I've notched over 5,000 auctions. This has only happened on a very, very small amount of times.
Hmm.
But these are sort of situations that are completely left of field. Loss of a job, death in the family, change of heart in that space,
Yeah.
very extenuating circumstances that are out of anyone's control,
I
and you
think
feel
that,
bad, but it's
yeah,
the law.
this is really, really good information, Daniel. I really appreciate you discussing this with us because I think this is where the biggest fear is for a lot of buyers. We get to a certain point and then they see, oh, it's auction. No, we don't want to go to auction. But guys, what Daniel's talking about over here is giving you a real opportunity from our perspective is if you've done your due diligence and it's property that you really want, I think a lot of people fall off at auctions where if you're sure about what you want and you get in there, you can actually achieve a better result by going to the auction. And it's exactly the same terms as doing an offer to purchase, realistically. It's a little bit more drama in between.
Just in addition to that, I guess it's the most transparent setting where you get all the control to bid to where you feel confident, comfortable, wherever you see value or wherever the bank or budget allows for, and others will do the same.
Mhm.
And there's no guesswork. You have the control to go higher if you wish. pull out when you want to stop. And that's what I love about auctions. And it's also a good way for the vendor to really understand fair market value when they don't actually even know what their home's worth either. And a lot of the time, vendors will align themselves to the market if they're faced with a harsh sense of reality, if they don't get the price that they were thinking originally, but hey, 50K less than what we were hoping for, that's enough for us. Let's call it a day. We'll sell it. And
Yeah.
we'll only ever see that shift come auction day. So I encourage you to get around auctions. I encourage you to be brave because I'm telling you, if you were to put an offer as a private treaty, and then the agent's ringing you saying, "Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I know that you've made an offer of 700, but unfortunately someone else has outbid you now." You're not going to really trust that, are you, to some respect?
Well, you never know. As a buyer, you don't know whether Mr. Agent is being realistic or
Yeah,
whether he's just, trying to pump the price up, and you don't
100%,
know.
right? And this is why I love auctions because no, you can have the control. Well, now it's all in the open.
Yeah,
If there's anyone that's going to be bidding against you,
you can see
well,
it.
here it is,
Yeah.
versus doing a closed deal where you feel, have I paid too much for this? Was there other competition? Have I been hoodwinked? Is generally what we see down that private treaty path with buyers and sellers. Buyers are like, hey, is there anyone else that I'm actually competing with? Because the agents have told me that there's so much interest in it, but do I actually believe that? And then it's the seller, hey, have I sold for a fair market price? Was there enough work done by the agent to get me the best that's available in the market price? You
I
know,
really like that. I love that whole thing of the transparency. And I mean, now that you've put it that way, Daniel, it's like, wow, yeah, actually you're 100% right. Because I mean, as buyers, we always doing private treaties and thinking, oh, we're putting our best foot forward. But just today I was speaking to an agent and just saying to him, look, it's a property that we really want to go ahead with. Please, can you give us our last option? And he said, I've got to give everybody their last option. So you've got to put your best foot forward. But what you're saying in an auction, it's actually pretty cool because you're 100% right. It's 100% transparent. You can decide what your top end is, and it's a lot safer, really, going into an auction room and seeing what everybody else is bidding. Maybe your top number was above, you know, where you thought it was, and in actual fact, nobody else is bidding that number. So you could be picking up a couple of good deals there.
it's only scary if you haven't prepared, right?
Hmm.
I always say, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. You've probably heard that thousands of times. So
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
just prepare. I mean, you Google these days, chat GPT, reach out to an auctioneer, speak to your agent, ask questions, be curious, don't
Yeah.
be scared. It's a big decision, right? It's not
Massive.
small.
No, it's
No one's
massive.
going to go and wing it. No one wants to wing it, but it's
And
actually it's quite easy.
I think a lot of people do just go in there and wing it, and they don't do that. But I think the big takeaway is that transparency, that you can actually see what the market is demanding. I wanted to ask you a quick question. You have some situations where the vendor bids at market as well, or at the vendor bidding.
Yes, vendor bids.
Yeah,
So,
how does that
as an
work?
auctioneer, I have the right to take as many vendor bids. I don't particularly like taking vendor bids. It's almost like dancing with your sister. It doesn't really get us anywhere, and it's slightly awkward.
So it's a little bit,
So,
I want to say it's a little bit
you probably want to delete
underhanded.
that part.
I'm pleased we can laugh about it, but realistically, it's not very nice for the buyer if the vendor is bidding against the buyer. Realistic.
Okay, so in instances where I may have a reserve of $1 million
Yeah.
and I've got a one bidder scenario, assuming that the opening bid from that one bidder is 600,000. And then how am I supposed to get to $1 million? Well, naturally, I'll have to place a vendor bid, assuming it's 700. I'll invite the client back towards eight. I'll place another vendor bid at 900 and then have that bidder jump back in at 1 million to make the reserve. So vendor bids are placed if there is very little competition, but you still want to have the property sell under auction terms. Or a vendor bid can also be placed if there is a very low start or no start. So, for example, if I call for an opening bid to get us underway, and
Mm,
then I hear crickets and there's radio silence for 30 seconds, well, then I would call for an opening bid at $700,000 as a vendor bid, and then I'll invite interest to bid above this figure. What I'm trying to do is to just get to where my vendor would like or very close to for the chance for it to sell. So yeah, that's the use of a vendor bid. I don't really take a lot of them. In fact, I haven't really needed to take one in this last 6 to 12 months because, as you know,
market's
supply is
on.
low and demand is very high. So
Yeah.
there's always competition on majority of stock at the moment.
So when you do a vendor bid, do you tell your audience that it is a vendor bid?
Yes. So by
Yeah.
law, I have to place it on behalf of the seller. So I'll exercise a vendor bid.
Mm,
So it's a vendor bid at $700,000, and ladies and gentlemen, need to be above this number for a chance of ownership. So I'll make it very clear that it is
right.
placed on behalf of the vendor.
So again, it's openness, it's transparency. There's no skullduggery in the background trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. And guys, I think what we're trying to drive home over here is that transparency, that going into auction, it really is going in with your eyes open, and the auctioneers being incredibly transparent at telling you how that auction's going to work, and also seeing how other people are bidding the other properties. What about price? Can you give any feedback on prices or offers that have been received by other buyers? Do you give much of that information when you're standing up there?
As in, whilst I'm doing an auction, so mid auction.
Yeah, well, not necessarily mid-auction, maybe beginning of auction that you have received offers that are at a particular point. Let's say if it's $1 million property, you've received offers at 800,000. Do you need to say that you've received other offers, or you just say we're starting the auction at 800,000, and you know that the
Yeah, so normally I would ask the agent where the interest has been on the property so I can get a gauge as to where things could potentially start. So, for example, vendors at $1 million, most of our offers and feedback have been between 800 and 950,000. I would expect bidding activity to start from at least 750, 800, and then onward it would go. So, normally what I would do is if I don't get a start, I would suggest a start, and it would probably be where the bottom end of our feedback was. And I'd suggest a start at $800,000, and then I would invite or encourage bidding above that.
Okay, so it kind of gives the audience an indication not to waste your time, and that's where the
Yes,
market is. So, if that's where offers are, and let's get on with the real show, make it happen.
that's right.
We've spoken about pre-auction offers, and I think from the auctioneer's perspective and from the agent's perspective, I think pre-auction offers are always a good thing. I like doing pre-auction offers because from a buyer's perspective, it always gives us a gauge of where the vendor is thinking, where the agent's thinking, where the auctioneer's thinking as well. What's your take on that?
Well, it's always worth asking the question, give it a crack. Why not? But, if you are seriously thinking of buying before an auction, I would be prepared to just bring an A game. I don't think putting an offer that's sort of loaded with terms and conditions is going to sway it in your favor. I think if you're considering putting an offer before auction day, make it clean, make it strong, make it compelling. Let's not play games. Because if your offer is merely average, most vendors will just wait till the day.
Mm,
However, it's sharp enough to make them rethink their strategy. Mate, who knows? We've seen good things happen sometimes. You've come in slightly above market value. It gets the vendors, you know what, maybe I should take that prior. So you might just secure that deal ahead of everyone else. But if you're kind of going to the pool of the average, well, then it's probably just going to run its course, right?
mm.
So a good, solid, unconditional offer would always get the vendors thinking. And that's what I mean by bringing your A game if you're thinking, an offer before auction.
Mm. How often does it happen that you've got a property on auction and somebody makes a pre-auction offer and the vendor thinks, yeah, okay, it's not worth going to auction. I'll take this offer. Does that often happen?
So on average, I'll get booked 50, 60 auctions a month ish. And then normally, two or three of them would have rang me and say, "Hey, Dan, you don't need to go to that auction because we've just taken an offer prior." And I'll ask the agent, how did that come about? Sometimes someone's come in really, really, like with a number that's blowing the vendor socks off. And to that buyer, if they think if they're going to come in 20, 50, or 100 grand above comparable sales,
Yeah,
well, yes, you are going to buy it before. You're going to be ahead of your competition. And yes, the agent will be like, "Hey, I think we should take this to the seller because I think this is too good to be true." That's what I mean by A game, right? And if you're thinking the next 10, 15, 20 years of your life, we're not owning property for 5 minutes normally, right? It's at least 5 or 10 years that someone retains a property for. Can you imagine, although you may think putting a higher offer in is going to cost you today, in the long run, you've secured your property in an appreciating market and you've gotten your weekends back. And
absolutely.
assuming that there was 10 others that were thinking the same, well, you've just gone in front of them and alleviated, that work so that you're not having any competition. Because if you put 10 people and they're all thinking the same, well, you could potentially be paying more than 100 grand come auction day, just purely emotion, fear of loss. If there's a packed house with, and there's 10 registered bidders for it, you may be paying a lot more than what you could potentially offer prior. So there's good and bad in both.
So that's a really, really good point. And what you're saying over there, don't let price be your barrier. I mean, realistically, if you've done your homework and it's a good property, don't be limited by price. Put it out there. The best, cleanest is going to win at the end of the day, whether you're going to auction or not. And I love what you said there about this really is the long-term game because so often I have conversations with buyers and they think that they're overpaying. And I always say to them, everybody thinks that they're overpaying. When you're buying a property, you always think that you're overpaying. But have a look at Brisbane 5 years ago, at Sydney 5 years ago, Melbourne, name any big city where there's gentrification. The property market hasn't gone backwards and it's not gonna go backwards. There's no ways because this is a country that is constantly bringing people in, that is gentrifying areas that they're building in infrastructure. So, look back at what your parents paid for their home versus what their homes are worth today. It's a no-brainer. So yes, you might feel like you're paying a little bit extra today, but you're so right, 100%. Down the line, you never overpay.
One of my lessons when I was 18 by my previous boss many, many years ago, he says, "There's never a right time to purchase, and it's always expensive."
I love that.
And I thought about that. I've used this my whole career. It's like, yes, it's always expensive. Like, and there's never the right time. But if you don't jump in, you're just going to continue to pay more the longer you wait.
Yeah. Dan, people ask me that it's one of the most common questions. They always say, is now the right time to buy? So I was speaking to a fellow yesterday. He's bought probably about 9 residential properties and now he wants to buy commercial properties. He's left a little bit late. He's in his late 50s. And he was saying to me, Mish, do I carry on buying residential properties or do I buy a commercial property? And my answer to him was, how many of those residential properties do you still have? And he said 3. I said, okay, fine. Why are you selling them down? He said, because they've just become a hassle. And I said to him, so when you bought those properties, were they the right time to buy the properties? And he said, hell yes. I said, so why are you asking me that question now? Because to me, it's always every day is the right day to be buying a property because it's an asset that grows, irrespective. So it doesn't matter, even if you're paying a little bit more for it. You've probably got more stories about this than what I have, but I remember buying a property. It was probably about 3 million and it was just under 3 million. I think it was about 2.88. And I thought, man, I'm paying way too much for this property. And within a year, that property had gone up by about $1 million. By the time I sold it for twice as much over a 5-year period.
Incredible.
We did some work to it and lifted it up. But that's just the power of real estate. It is forever.
A safe bet. Definitely a safe bet.
Yeah. There's higher population and there's land shortage. So, it's supply and demand. But anyway, we've gone right down the rabbit hole over here. I
No,
love it.
I mean, I was just about to mention, it's funny, I say this in my auction when people are like toying with that $500 or 1,000 towards the end. I said, guy, it's just a house, right? It's not your husband or wife. If you don't like it, sell it one day, you'll make money. You can't get rid of your husband or wife that easy, but you can get rid of your asset that easy and you'll make money on it. So you're not going to be at a disadvantage.
Yeah,
So
I think it's that whole emotional thing when you are purchasing and it's am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? I always say you're doing the right thing. Just do it. Just do it and sort it out later. Figure it out later.
correct.
So Daniel, when let's just say auction goes on and property's passed in at auction, who and how, what do they do straight after that? Who gets first rights to negotiation straight after the auction if
Uh,
an auction's passed in?
Yeah. So typically it will go to the highest bidder.
Hmm.
Those exclusive rights will go to the highest bidder, which is why we would encourage, buyers to remain actively engaged, even if the bidding doesn't meet the reserve. So I've witnessed buyers win properties post auctions for much less than what the vendors were initially willing to sort of sell for
Yeah.
because they were the highest bidder. It just meant that they remained in the game. They were persistent in the negotiations, but they were the highest bidder, and the highest bidder would get those exclusive rights to negotiate at the vendor's reserve. For example, the vendors may want a ridiculous number that
Yeah.
may not be market value, but we would encourage to bid to where you feel confident. Know that if the reserve price hasn't been met, then it will get passed into you as the highest bidder, and then you'll have the exclusive chance to negotiate at the reserve. So we've seen many times buyers, purchasing post auction for much less.
Okay, well, I think that's gold because I think a lot of people after they leave the auction, they never phone back again. They never phone back a week later to inquire whether the property went through, maybe it fell over, maybe there were legal issues. So what you're saying is stay in the game,
And again,
stay in touch. Yeah. Let the emotions go and keep moving.
correct. Yes, we don't hold back, don't wait because you might miss your shot. Property could get passed into another highest bidder, and if you didn't put your hand up, well, you won't get those rights unless you're lucky enough that the negotiation didn't go well and it goes back to the private treaty market. Then you might have some luck negotiating it that way. But in this market, it doesn't really happen often.
No. In a hot market, I think everybody's all over it. But yeah, it's a good question and very good to know. Never give up. Hang in there. So, with regards, let's say legal issues, and I know the answer to this is, if the property has got legal issues or something, are you obliged to mention that? And do you mention that when you take to auction?
I think it's good practice for agents and auctioneers that I think they should always disclose these types of issues, but you've got to take the initiative and ask because they don't really need to. It's good practice to do that. Like I couldn't sleep at night knowing that if there was something legally wrong, or there was a property issue, or there was someone that committed suicide in the property. I want to have the heart to be able to tell someone that,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of people that won't. So just don't assume that the contract's going to tell you everything you need to know, right?
So again, that's
Yeah.
gold. That's having conversations with the agents.
Yeah, and so inquire about renovations, easements, neighborhood disputes, anything that could potentially affect, how you use or value that property.
Going forward. Yeah, I think that is vitally important. And I always say this game is not really the property game, it's a communications game. The more you communicate, the more questions you ask, the more you find out about the property that you're potentially going to be owning, the better off you are. So, and it's really great. I think there's this whole dim over purchasing properties that in the old days, it was cloak and dagger where sellers didn't have to tell you this information. Now there's more of an obligation where they do need to tell you that Joe Bloggs committed suicide in the back room, because all the neighbors would know.
100%.
Not
Yeah,
that great.
absolutely.
Yeah. So there's a common question that a lot of people ask is if they go to bid and their finance is conditional and not finalized yet, what do they do about it? What do you suggest?
So technically they can still bid, but I can't stress enough that you're taking a huge risk by doing so. Most brokers will be able to pre-approve you before the auction, and you'd be a part of the minority that are pre-approved but can't bid. I would suggest another opinion from a different bank or lender. I guess where we see some issues is when people have gone a bit above and beyond their capacity. This is when we can see people get into a bit of hot water. They've gone 100 grand above their budget. That's very, very wrong to do so. We wouldn't encourage that. That's why I say, prepare, prepare, prepare. Ask questions with your bank, your broker, or lender. Don't bid unless you feel absolutely confident that you can, because what happens is at auction, the contract is typically unconditional and they will not take any conditions upon finance. If you win and your bank declines to finance you afterwards, you could forfeit your deposit and be liable for losses. Doesn't happen often, but it does happen.
Okay.
That's not just a lost opportunity, it's a major setback that can really hurt you for years. Because as you know, it's hard to say 50 or 100 grand, and that could set you back a long, long time. So always, please prepare. Call me if you need to. Happy to sort anything out for you.
That's great. That's fantastic advice. And also, I mean, I've seen this happen before. And just for the listeners, where somebody has gone to auction and it's gone beyond where they could afford, the other means of purchasing the property. We had one guy who went to second tier lending. Yes, he did end up paying quite a lot more for it. So he paid higher interest rates, but he still managed to secure that property. And within 6 months, he had recovered. So there are other ways of doing it, but I think Daniel's advice over there is do your homework, or do your homework. And preferably don't go above what you can't afford. It's for that 10% of high risk buyers that perhaps would do that. But for the majority, yes, just be aware of it. It is, as you say, when that hammer falls, it's unconditional. It makes all the difference. So, Daniel, when you're standing on the stand and you're scanning the crowd, you mentioned it earlier, you're looking for the serious bidders. Would you be looking for or directing your conversation or bid to people that you have already spoken to? What exactly are you looking for from the podium?
I'm watching everything. My eyes can dance left, right, up, and down. I look for even the small little details because I think detail matters. I'm really tuned into body language, pacing. Some people, even the way couples interact with each other, who's holding the bitter paddle confidently, who's gripping it tight because they're feeling the pressure. I pick up on hesitations, furtive whispers, and those quick glances to the agent. I guess my job is to build momentum, and that means I'm always reading which bidders are likely to jump back in. So I'm always constantly scanning Mish. I'm
Mhm.
looking for everything. I don't miss a thing.
So you being a little bit of a psychiatrist up there as well, just reading people's emotions, eyes, body language,
Absolutely.
interactions, everything.
100%. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm a bit of a pit bull with a bone when it comes to people bidding. So I'll kind of latch onto them in a nice jovial way. I'm trying to, make it very light-hearted so they don't have to feel this pressure cook environment. So I do my auctions very different to others. You probably know this, Mish. I like to just have fun with them because I think
Yeah.
you have fun, people get a chance to relax and feel confident and comfortable. And that's what I'm here for, not to make it a scary.
And Daniel, I think that's what makes for a good auctioneer is that you make people feel comfortable.
Thank you, Mish.
It's really fantastic having this conversation and debunking quite a lot of the auctioneer's roles. So, how much homework do you do on the actual bidders? If you know who the bidders are, how much homework do you do on them?
Quite a bit, actually. I mean, I love to do my homework. I mean, if we're running multiple auction campaigns, and my work is predominantly done with the agents, so I'm kind of keen to know who's been proactive, who's been requesting contracts, who's asked insightful questions. I'll ask the agent where have the offers been, what's the feedback been like, who's walked through the house on multiple times. So if I'm scanning the room, I'm picking up paddle card number 6, and I would have known that they've been, there a few times. So I'll try to approach them and just say, hey guys, I'm really hoping that you end up with it because, hey, you've been through a few times. I'm sure you feel comfortable here. Let's get your weekends back type of thing. All these sort of factors, I guess, contribute to reading the room, and it definitely helps me guide the auction more effectively. I don't like guesswork. I never did. So I like to prepare myself. So I do get not deeply involved in the campaign, but I think homework is important for auctioneers because we can really then break down as to who's buying it or who that ideal candidate's going to look like. But then you can just get some random Joe Blow that hasn't seen the property, gone and registered on the day, and then ended up taking it out. Like it could be completely random where all our homework could be for nothing. But that's the beauty of an auction. You just don't know. But I like to prepare myself. Thanks, Mitch.
Well, I think that's amazing. If bidders ask who they're bidding against, are you open to telling them, who the other bidders are? Is it something you do? Is it something you prefer not to do? Do you prefer to leave them to find out on the day?
We never reveal names, but of course you can actually scan the room and look who's got a paddle card. So
Yeah.
you kind of get a gist of how many people have registered. We might share some context, like indicating that there's some people here that are investors, or there's a couple of downsizers, or even a first home buyer in the mix. I mean, that kind of information can, somewhat influence your strategy,
And you,
especially if you're, planning on outlasting the competition. So yeah, you can really work out in a room if you're at a house or if it's an in room. You can see if it's buzzing, you can see if there's energy, how many bidders typically, but it means nothing. I mean, I can have Mish 30 people register for one home and only 2 people put their hand up. It's happened many, many times. So
really?
don't let that spook you. Go in with your own game plan,
Yeah.
and that's all that matters.
Okay. So in other words, shut off whatever's happening around you, have your game plan, know what you're heading for. In other words, what your top number is, and just
Okay.
shield off to whatever's happening around you. Yeah. That's amazing. And I really, really love what we've spoken about so far because you've just lifted that lid on that whole thing about cloak and dagger that you can't speak to the auctioneer, that, it's that gap between the buyer and the auctioneer. I think that's really amazing. This has been super, super, super valuable just having you on board. And thank you, Daniel. I know you're really, really busy and I really appreciate the time that you've taken and just talking about all of this stuff and yeah, putting it out there that guys, don't be scared of the auctioneers. There's Daniel opening and saying to you, speak to them, find out what's happening, ask all those questions that you really are scared of asking. He's saying, load it, bring it on. You can never ask too many questions. No question is a stupid question. So that's really, really fantastic. I really appreciate that. Daniel, we're definitely going to have to do this again. You've been an awesome guest. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask you one thing. Give me one takeaway that you'd like the audience to hear just before you go.
I guess we're just circling around. Just listen closely, do your prep work, read the room, gauge the atmosphere, and if you truly want to win, just know your numbers, stand strong, and for God's sake, don't blink. Have
Don't
fun with
blink. Don't blink.
it.
Make sure you breathe, though.
Make sure you breathe.
Daniel, thank you very much. We will put your contact details in the notes. And I think just for ease sake, we'll put your email address in the notes as well. If anybody wants to reach out to you, are you okay for them to drop you a line, pick it up?
100%.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, again, thank you very much. And guys, thank you for joining us. I hope you got tremendous value out of that. I know that I did. And we're definitely going to have Daniel again very soon. So thanks, Dan, and see you next time.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye bye.
Cheers.